Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sammasambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sammasambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sammasambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. So Sharon and I were talking about the structure of the retreat, and we were aware of the fact that with everything that's going on in the world, people's nervous systems are a little bit amped up. Well, that's probably an understatement. Mm-hmm. And so we wanted to set the structure so that we could maximize the sense of ease and well-being and rest and renewal. And so, sometimes the Dharma talks are soothing and sometimes they're fiery. And so we wanted to have the Dharma talks in the daytime and have just something just deeply nourishing in the evening time, so that before we rested there was just the sense that the nervous system could unwind and relax and unravel, and we would rest well. So making these simple things like rest a priority, so that the basic sense of well-being begins to increase and people feel a sense of capacity to manage what's happening, and then use the mindfulness in order to bring it to what our experience is. So this is actually quite a sweet time for me. Some of you know, but not all of you know. I went to the monastery 28 years ago, and have been a nun for over 26 years, and so altogether this is more than half of my life. And about 6 weeks ago made the choice that, can't hear. So is that because this is not close enough? Okay. So let's put this where it's closer. Let's see if I can put it here. How's that? Yeah? Better? Maybe? Okay. So about 6 weeks ago, it became like this sudden recognition that I needed to make a different choice and move out of this renunciant form as a monastic and relinquish my robes and these monastic precepts and return to living the life of a yogini with fewer precepts. And so, there's been this wash of images or feelings or ideas, and so there's stories coming about when I was a young nun. So you've got some young nun stories coming up as I sift and sort and process this transition. So I wanted to talk about basic tools of meditation. And so the story that comes up is when I was a medium's young nun. I was the work nun at Amaravati. And Amaravati, in the monastery, I split my time between Amaravati and Chitters. And Amaravati has a workshop. The square footage of it is bigger than this temple, okay? And the workshop. So I was the work nun, and I was in charge of keeping it clean, keeping it tidy, keeping it resupplied, getting the machines repaired and keeping them sharp. And the workshop had all kinds of stuff. It had an electronics department and a plumbing department and a painting department. It had inside wood and outside wood. It had saws, and it had hand tools, and it had a welding department. It had big machines and small machines. It had hand tools and electric tools. It had a bunch of tools. And it took me a long time, a really long time, to get to understand the workshop and even what I was supposed to do in the workshop, how I was supposed to take care of it. But I could always, I had health problems, so my energy would fluctuate. And sometimes I had good energy and sometimes I had terrible energy, but I could always sweep the floor and I could always sort the screws. So, people would take out screws and then they'd come back with a pile, a mess, and they'd just leave it in the workshop. And it was my job to sort the screws. And I learned to figure out what the sizes were, and I could pick them out and put them back in the right boxes. And so it was like, it was cool, I could do that, And then there were things that would drive me nuts. Like I remember I would go to the morning at breakfast time with the chisels, and I'd give lectures about how that was a chisel and that was a screwdriver, and you had better watch out if you use a chisel as a screwdriver. So the things that would agitate me, the way it does. You put your heart into something and it's aggravating when you put hours into sharpening a bunch of chisels and people use them like screwdrivers, But the reality is that even though there were many, many different screws and many different kinds of saws and many different kinds of hammers and many different kinds of screwdrivers and many, many, many different tools, there were only a handful that we used regularly. And it's very much the same in meditation, I've been putting together a video library on the Awakening Truth website to support this process of, awakening, maturation, healing, and engagement. And there's like 12 videos on loving kindness, different kinds of loving kindness, different aspects of loving kindness, letting it in, developing it, working with the body, loving kindness when we've got trauma, how to manage loving kindness in this circumstances and that circumstance. But it's all loving kindness, Just like, we had a rack of screwdrivers. There were probably 30 screwdrivers, but they were just screwdrivers. And basically, there were two kinds. There were Phillips and there were regular screwdrivers, Different sizes, different applications, but two screwdrivers. So in the myriad of many, many different tools that we have, there's a handful that I have come back to again and again and again. Just a handful. And it's useful to know what your particular handful is, and it might be that you have some differences from me, But I'll share my handful and talk about them and how I use them and how they are applicable in a whole life practice. The first one is mindfulness. Mindfulness as it's connected to the Eightfold Path, not mindfulness as it's gold-plated and extracted from the Eightfold Path, which is sometimes what we see in our modern, contemporary, secular world. But the practice of bringing awareness to what is, of just allowing attention to turn to what is and to meeting it and to relinquishing the story we tell ourselves about what's happening. To relinquishing the story that we tell ourselves about who we are because this is happening. To meet something, to know it, to sustain attention with it in a relaxed and even way. Mindfulness. It's a very useful tool in the toolbox. Another incredibly useful tool in the toolbox is loving kindness. To bring forward a heart of warmth, of care, of interest. And so the way I look at it is mindfulness and loving kindness are two sides of the same thing, really. Mindfulness has the ability to observe. It doesn't reject anything. But the tone of it is that it's cool. Loving kindness has the ability to embrace. It is inclusive. It doesn't exclude anything. But the tone of it is that it's warm. They're two sides of the same capacity to observe without judgment, to include what is arising, to reject nothing. And sometimes what is needed is mindfulness. And other times what is needed is loving kindness. And for me, the difference is that when I am averse to something, pushing it away, don't want to know about it, don't want to see, don't want to feel it, don't want to be here, get out of here, get out of my way, get out of my space. I'm doing that internally to my own experience. Then that's when I need the warmth of embracing, of welcome. I need to bring in loving kindness. When I'm grabbing hold, this is me, this is mine, this is my story, this is my characteristic, this is my. It's somehow important to me. It's about me, it's about me, it's about me and mine and me and mine. And the many different ways that we do that, the I-making, the me-making, the mind-making, the grabbing on, the identification, the gripping, the clutching, then the coolness of observation is what is necessary. And so these two, back and forth, the quality of observation that has warmth in it, loving kindness, and the quality of observation that has coolness and equanimity to it, mindfulness, are really fundamental tools in the toolbox. Another really important tool in the toolbox is generosity, being able to give. Being able to give time, being able to share what one has, being able to show up and make space for oneself, for others, and cultivating a heart of generosity that tethers us to our own goodness. It's our easiest, fastest access to the dignity that's inherent, is when we cultivate generosity through deliberate practices of giving and sharing. Because anybody who spends more than a little bit of time on a meditation cushion will recognize that there are plenty of things that we experience that are activating and dysregulating and upsetting. And we see things about ourselves that we don't want to know. We rather were not there. We did not have to know. And so if we don't have an access to our own goodness, then it's really easy that when all this stuff surfaces, for it just to move directly into story. This is who I am. This is the story about who I am. This is the way I've always been. This is the way I always will be. It feeds the proliferation of the mind when we don't have the leverage of access to our own generosity, to our own goodness, and the dignity that comes with that, to be able to just have ballast against the momentum of who we think we should be, in contrast, in comparison to what is. So there's generosity, there's also integrity, being able to have a discernment about what feels harmful. What feels out of integrity? I made an agreement. What does it mean for me to make an agreement? Do I follow through? If I renege, what is my responsibility if I'm reneging my agreement? If I'm committed to harmlessness, what does that mean? What does that mean to myself? What does that mean to my friends? What does that mean to my family? Am I somebody that I can trust? Am I somebody that somebody else can trust? So integrity as a practice is really important. It's important to know where we stand. It's important to know what happens when we're pushed. It's important to know when we're up against two needs that are in conflict with each other. How do we navigate that? What are our standards? What are our values? So when we spend time with integrity and we polish it, we work it, we understand what our bottom line is, then when we are in challenges, situations like that, we know what our values are. Now, it might be still that we're confused, and it might take a while for us to connect what we know with our ability to think or to speak or to act. But that's different from not knowing, from not having examined, explored, having looked at these things with some interest and recognized the importance of them. So loving kindness shows up as a quality that we bring forward in meditation, and it also shows up as part of the Brahma-Vihara, the divine abidings. The qualities of loving kindness and compassion and joy and equanimity. and to learn how to shift one's focus from being gripped by complaining or being gripped by something that's difficult or painful or dark, and deliberately move into something which is heart-opening, gladdening. And each of these, loving kindness and compassion and joy and equanimity, have specific practices within them and bring forward slightly different qualities of mind. And all of them take us from our ordinary judgment and reactivity into a heartful way of being with what is, where our minds are opening, our bodies relaxing, we're relating to something in an altogether different way. Yeah. So somebody steals the parking place that you were waiting for. And it's easy to go into judgment, criticism, negativity, anger, blaming, frustration, cursing, swearing. It's not so easy to go, good on you, you got it, may you be well. You know? And yet when we train our minds to move towards the Brahma-vihara, then it is a cutting across the habits that are their opposite. When we train our minds to move into loving kindness, it cuts across fear and anxiety. It cuts across wanting to harm. So the Brahma-vihara are really important in understanding how to know what they are, to access them, to bring them into brightness and fullness. And so is devotion. So, you know, I came into the Dhamma in similar ways that I see all of us here, you know, in a secular context. And in the secular context that I was in, we didn't even have Buddha statues. And it was kind of like sacrosanct to light a candle and an incense. It was like that was way over the top, you know? And I remember going to India and watching these people bowing, doing these full body bows to the Mahabodhi stupa in Bodh Gaya. And some of these people as pilgrims had walked for thousands of miles, and every 3 steps had done a full body bow as a way of making the journey to the Mahabodhi stupa, as an expression of their devotion to the Buddha and the Buddha's awakening and the path of awakening that was then available after his teaching to all of us. And I watched these people bow, and it was like, how are they doing that? Like, where do they find the place in themselves to bow? I mean, it's not like I could figure out what you did with your body. It was like, what are you doing with your heart? And what's happening with your mind? And why, how is it that this is such a part of your life that you're willing to spend this amount of time and energy bowing? You know, it was like, wow. And then I came to the monastery, not long after I arrived. I had some health issues, and the regular way of sitting up and focusing on the breath and all the rest of that wasn't so available to me, but I could always chant and I could always bow. And so then bowing was not just kind of a nice thing that you did, it was like one of my anchors to the practice. So devotion, having a way of surrendering to something that is bigger, access to something, surrender, access, the recollection of something that is bigger. And then I discovered a way of being with nature. How nature could be that for me. How when I would relax in nature, the mind would just open up. And so learning how to be in nature as a way of surrendering to what was bigger. what was pervasive, what was ever present, what was timeless. That it wasn't only about me trying to do an it, but it was about opening up to what is always, always have been here, always will be here. And it's just a question of shifting the focus and allowing that to come forward in a way where it's the divine is animating rather than me trying to organize, orchestrate, do. And in meditation practice, there's absolutely times when we need to pick up tools and meet what's arising in order to bring more balance to our experience. And there's other times where what's necessary is not to try and do something with what is going on, but to let go into something that is much bigger, vast, holding, and timeless. And just step out of the way. And for me, the trick is to be clear about what's happening and how I'm relating to it. And as simple as that seems, it is remarkably challenging. Because the idea of who I am supposed to be is constantly interfering with what is actually going on. And these last weeks, a case in point, here I am, a monastic for all these years, and what has been happening is this kind of like, it's actually a remarkable time. It's like the rites of passage that happen in an entire lifetime are happening all right now. And one of the things that I notice with all of this is that there's both evocative of mind states that were unconscious before. So it's like the veils are peeled way back. But also early childhood consciousnesses are available to me, where they just come up and then they take over, And so sometimes, I just notice that I'm operating from the consciousness of an infant. Well, the consciousness of an infant doesn't have the same resource as an adult. And yet, if you superimpose an idea about how I'm supposed to be on top of that, it takes forever to figure it out. But if you're just, okay, this is what's happening right now, this is what's happening right now, this is what's happening right now, and bring full care and attention to that, it sorts reasonably quickly. So it's all here. Infants, children, pre-adolescents. I feel sometimes like I'm 11, Like this before pubescent, budding being, A young adult, a mature woman, an elder. There's a death process I'm in. It's all present right now. All of it is here right now. And so these tools of bringing about clarity with what's happening and responding with kindness and observation, going into nature both to plug into what is pervasive as well as to help regulate. Generosity both with myself and with others. Integrity to know that I'm not crossing over boundaries. It's not that complicated. Even though the actual territory is tremendously complicated. The many different things that I need to think about and figure out, and the stuff that I'm navigating, and what about this, and what about that, and what's my name going to be? And what am I going to wear? And do I need a bank account before this or after that? All these things. The normal things that people do over the course of growing up. It's like all of it's compressed, And so here we have a path, which is, for me, my intent is to awaken, but it also is to mature and to grow up and to understand what my needs are. And to be able to know my needs and advocate for them. And to be able to advocate for my needs where it is not at other people's expenses. And then, for me, I can see that as the more I'm able to do that for myself, know what my own needs are and advocate for them, so that I'm coming from a stable base of feeling grounded and nourished and well and energized and relaxed, then the more I have the capacity to meet others and help them and support them, both with knowing what their needs are and being an ally and an advocate to help them getting their needs met. So yes, my life for decades has been absolutely committed to awakening. And I have seen over the course of my life as a meditation practitioner and living in community, that by itself is not sufficient to navigate this path of maturation. The deep, profound insights into the nature of our own minds and what the nature of existence is about is not the same as knowing what our needs are and advocating for them. It's not the same as being able to do it without it being at somebody else's expense. And so that was for me both a shock and a revelation to realize that some of my teachers were profoundly wise, awakened beings and not that grown up. But it explained a lot. When I realized that these two are separate paths, they're not the same path. The path of awakening does not automatically assure maturation. Certainly the path of maturation has no guarantee that there's going to be awakening unless there's a path of awakening and practices that support it. And that was not something I was ever taught. That's something that I had to figure out. That never came through any of the Dharma talks. The Dharma talks were the opposite, that if you meditate and commit entirely to the path of awakening, that's all that you will need. Because the only suffering that matters will be resolved if you commit to the path of awakening and practice sufficiently and diligently long enough. And I'm sorry, that has not been my experience. And so it's radical, completely radical, to be this committed in the path of awakening and to say it's not enough. It's not the only thing that's needed. So I'm a bit of a revolutionary. Because my experience does not account with what I have heard. So these tools, loving kindness and mindfulness and generosity and integrity and devotion, they are supportive in the path of awakening, but they're also supportive in the path of maturation, to be able to help us identify what our needs are. It's also helpful as we are navigating this because it's easy to get enmeshed into characteristics of identity, to move back and forth after a certain stage, to move back and forth between understanding and advocating for our own needs and really focusing on that and handing it over completely and recognizing in this timeless, pervasive, ever-present mind that this stuff is not really who and what I am. It puts it in really good perspective. So even the path of maturation itself is supported by moving in and out of identification with our needs. thing that I discovered was that in addition to awakening and maturation, there's a path of healing, which itself has got its own things that it needs to bring. I have my own traumas. Probably others of you do as well. And certain of the meditation teachings are counterproductive. So when there's trauma stuff that's arising, it's the worst thing in the world to tell somebody to sit still and not move. It's like the last thing that they need. They totally need to be able to self-regulate. They need to be able to get up and run. They need to be able to express strong, energetic energy. They don't need to be told to be quiet. So when we are navigating a lot of trauma and it's releasing, then we need to be very selective and discerning about how often we're in a meditation hall, particularly when there's a culture that's asking for a lot of stillness and silence, because there's times when that's not what's needed. But healing also includes our ability to self-care, to take care of ourselves, to learn about our bodies and how our energies work, and to learn about the kinds of foods that we need to eat that actually make us feel well, and to know the kinds of foods that make us feel terrible. And so it was painful experience for me when I got sick, and I could not manage to eat only before midday, and I needed to eat after midday. It was excruciating because it was rubbing against the idea of what I thought I should be doing as a monastic. As a monastic, we eat only before midday. We don't eat after midday. So there was a rub between the form I was in and then the need to take care. And eventually I found the way to be able to support myself, something simple like having the food that I needed when I needed it. And you might find this shocking, but my health improved. I found it shocking. Simple things, not too complex. And so I also found it incredibly valuable to spend decades where the renunciation helped me see what was a real need and what was the kind of anxiety of what I think I might need. There was a story. Ajahn Sumedho was teaching a retreat at Spirit Rock, and there was a refrigerator, and in the refrigerator was a special diet refrigerator for the yogis. And there was like a beehive around that refrigerator, people coming and going and checking and eating, and super, it was just like there was this constant activity and energy around the special diets refrigerator on the retreat center. And I don't know if any of you have met Ajahn Sumedho. He's a large man with a big physical presence, and he's got a big, deep voice. And he came in one morning, he said, "Take your stuff out of the refrigerator, or it's going to be thrown away in an hour. The special diets refrigerator is done. It's over. No more special diet refrigerator." And everybody survived the retreat. So it goes both ways. It totally goes both ways. We can be obsessed about our special needs and completely preoccupied with it and completely immersed and absolutely losing perspective. And then we can take the form and we can use it so that we don't actually pay attention to what our needs are. We aren't taking care of our body. We don't give ourselves permission to have what we need because we are wanting to do what is right and belong in the group and fit into the form. It goes both ways. And what is needed is the discernment to be able to use any practice so that it opens our heart and frees our energy and gives us the ability to live fully and clearly and wisely. There is no one practice that is an absolute practice. Everything is contextual. And we need to have the wisdom and the curiosity to know When is the context when it serves us and when it doesn't? We can take basic tools and use them to become completely invigorated, alive, juicy, on the edge. And we can use them to reinforce all of our unskillful habits and patterns and help us go to sleep. So it isn't even so much the tools that we are using, but the attitude we're using them with, the purpose we are using them for. And that's where we need to be curious. What is the result? Now, I'm an edge walker and a fire walker, and I push edges all of the time. And one of the things that happens is occasionally I discover things that are incredibly useful. And one of the things that I discovered that's incredibly useful is lying down. So I come from a culture where it's considered grossly rude to lie down in a meditation hall. It's inappropriate, it's rude, it's not skillful practice. And I noticed that when I lie down, I would relax in a way that I could never relax when I was initially sitting up. So in my private practice, I would lie down. And in the rocks in the Garden of the Gods, I would lie down. And in a state park in California, I would lie down. Or I would lean up against the tree. And I noticed that it would help me relax this hypervigilance that was kind of background and basic and kind of endemic to my system. And once that began to relax, the mind could open and suffuse. And once that had happened, there was a totally different physiology and a completely different nervous system to work with. So that when I did sit up, what was possible was altogether different than before. So I have found, as wise and as gifted as the teachers that I have been, that it has been really important to learn to trust myself. And to be discerning myself and self-regulating myself and to figure out for myself what it is that I need and how it works for me. To make it work for me. And not to just assume that because for 2,600 years people don't sit down, lie down, then that's the right way for me. So there's a kind of like fierceness in willing to explore what's true. And it has taken me way out of my comfort zones lots of times because I have not been able to figure out the box that I fit in. Because the way that I practice is not the way some of my monastic brothers and sisters practice. So I can't see myself in their example. But I have had to trust an unfolding that happens through me. Because I have been looking at the result. What it is to let the heart open, to body relax, to allow the mind to let go. To feel the vitality of that, the aliveness of that, and the way in which these different parts that I have discovered, awakening and wholeness and healing and engagement, are all part of one human life. They don't need to be compartmentalized. We might need separate tools or ways of approaching each one, but they can all be part of one human life. And when I bring the basic tools that I have to support that, a whole life that is both committed to awakening and to wholeness and aliveness, where I understand the healing journey that I need to do and am committed to it. It's a different level of relaxing in my own skin. It's a different level of joy. It's a different capacity to engage with myself, with individuals, and with groups. And even though there has never been a Buddhist teacher that has told me that this is the right way of practicing, there's a conviction born out of experience, tested with result, that says, yes, this is my path. And I can stand by it. So I offer these tools and these reflections for your consideration, to make use of what is useful, to let go of what is not useful, with the encouragement for each of you to learn to trust yourselves and your own path. That you too can feel and find and live a whole life that isn't compartmentalized, that is resourced. It's full of joy as well as awakening. So I offer these for reflection today. Thank you.